Thanks for joining us. Nice to see many familiar faces and names. My name is Cecil Konijnendijk, and I'm coordinator of IUFRO's Division 6, which is, as we always say, the best division in IUFRO. I'm just kidding, of course, but it's the social science, social aspects of forestry division. And one of the new things we've done in this challenging time of global pandemic is to maybe make something out of the challenge and set up this new webinar series. So we had a really interesting webinar a few months back on COVID, as you remember, COVID and the use of green spaces. So COVID will also feature today, but in a different perspective. So we're going to hear from 4 excellent panelists on how it is to be a forest scientist, a forest academic, or somebody looking at forests as an academic, doesn't have to be a forestry professional, during a global pandemic. So what have been the challenges? What have been the opportunities? Are there maybe some advices to be transferred to some of the colleagues? And how have we tried to balance these challenging work times with things like life and trying to also recreate and find some peace and quiet sometimes. So we will do so that we have short introductions from the 4 panelists. And after that, I will have a few questions for them. And then I will also invite all of you to post your questions or comments in the chat. So there will be an opportunity to raise issues or maybe also share some of your experiences. The 4 panelists today, and I'm really happy to have you with us. First of all is Dr. Jerylee Wilkes-Allemann, who is originally Bolivian, but has a long background now in Germany and Switzerland, where she's presently working for ETH in the past, and currently now at, I have to say this right, the Bern University of Applied Sciences, where she's doing a lot of work on urban forestry, ecosystem services. I know she also has an interest in forest therapy, and one of the latest things she's diving into. And Jerylee has also been very active in both Swiss and in European networks on urban forestry. And then after Jerylee, we'll hear from a very good colleague of mine in IUFRO in Division 6, Purabi Bose. And Purabi is a really interesting person in terms of her background. She has backgrounds in anthropology, in forestry and interdisciplinary sciences. She combines her research and academic work with multimedia work. She does filmmaking, she does a lot of writing, and she works very much with indigenous communities, with gender issues in forestry. And I know she's working hard right now on a book as well, covering some of these topics across the world. So Purabi, thanks so much for joining us from Goa, India. And then I have the pleasure to, thank you, to introduce also my colleague from UBC, University of British Columbia, Sophie Nitoslawski, who is currently based in Ottawa, Canada. And Sophie is doing her doctoral studies on issues of smart urban forestry and how to integrate technology in urban forestry, as well as to look at densifying cities and the role of urban forests. And Sophie is also very active in different networks in Canada, as well as internationally. She's, for example, on the Science and Research Council, or committee, I should say, of the International Society of Arboriculture. So Sophie, thanks for joining us. I know it's early morning for you, so really appreciate you here. And then last but not least, in this strong female lineup, we also have one gentleman, Nick de Schio, who is based in Brussels. And I should also say this correct. You're at the Cosmopolis Center for Urban Research of the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. At least I can say that, being Dutch. And Nick has been doing some really interesting work related to what he describes urban socio-ecological good and bad, and the nexus between science, state, and civil society, which sounds very fascinating. And I know Nick primarily through his current research for the Clearinghouse project, which is a Sino-European project looking at urban forestry aspects. So what will happen is that I'll invite all of the panelists to give a very brief perspective of their life and work as a forest scientist during the pandemic. And then after that, we'll engage in a discussion. So Jerylee, can I pass the floor to you first, please?
Thank you very much, Cecil, for this nice introduction and also for inviting me to participate in this panel. So I'm working, as Cecil said, I'm working at the Bern University of Applied Science, more precisely at the School of Agriculture, Forest and Food Science, HAFL, which is based close to Bern. And there I am a research associate, and I am responsible for teaching at the bachelor level. So for example, I'm teaching urban forestry and also communication in the forest sector. And I'm doing a lot of research also in this domain, mainly related to ecosystem services. For example, the recreation function of forest and the role it plays in Switzerland, and also related to the role in the sense of as a recreation area in times of pandemics. So when the pandemic started, I was asked to express myself how it was my perspective during the pandemic. So when the pandemic started, I started this new job. So I after a couple of weeks of being working at the University of Applied Science, I had to go to do home office. So it was, so by that, when I started to work, so just for you to see how I work, I had to commute 1 hour and 3/4 because I live in the city of Zurich and I work in the city of Bern. So it was a lot of commuting. So that was the positive side for me of the pandemic. So I could stay at home. I didn't have to commute. So I had more time to do other things. However, when the pandemic started, I had the feeling that I started to have more intensively meetings, like one after the other. And I didn't have I had the feeling that I had to work much more than the weeks before. Additional to this pressure, I have also 2 kids, which one is 7 years old and one is 2 years old. And the 7 years old could not go anymore to school. And my little daughter could continue going to nursery. So that was the lucky thing of it as well, because otherwise I think the things would have been looked differently. My husband also started staying at home. He could also do home office. So we shared responsibilities with my older daughter. So that means that we divided the day in 2. One was responsible for the morning for her. One was responsible for the afternoon for her. And the rest we were working, and also we started working in the evening. So that's something I never did before. So I started to work until late in the evenings in order to manage all the responsibilities I had. And I couldn't, I had a big responsibility because I'm also leading 2 big projects. One is developing a research agenda for future biocities, and a second one is analyzing the recreation function of forest in the Swiss context. So what were my main challenges that I had? So I had, I think, 2 main challenges, and these are time and balance. And time in the sense of trying to do the job, because I really loved the job and I really love my job. Somehow to do it in the time given. So it was very short, like 4 hours in the morning and then maybe a couple of hours in the evening. And also being more productive and effective in the time that I had to work. And also the whole time being at home, being very intensely with your kids, with your husband, it's very challenging. So, and the balance, I mean, in the sense of balancing time for work and family. So I had to really to concentrate myself when I was working, but also when I was with my daughters, to concentrate on them and to leave work aside and not start thinking what else I have forgotten to do in the morning. So this was very 2 things that I challenged a lot during this time. However, the opportunities that I see is that I really enjoyed also having somehow more time with my family, experiencing my daughter every day, because normally she goes to nursery or to school and then to another place to take care of her. So the opportunities I also see is that I learned to be more flexible, to be more creative and more efficient. For example, from one day to the other, I had to completely change my teaching. As I said, I'm teaching communication in the forest sector. So I planned a lot of communication. It's very difficult to do online. So it was very challenging to change it, but I also turned to be a little bit creative. And also I had to teach urban forestry. And in this course, we planned a lot of excursions, and suddenly we had to do everything online. So I really had to be creative in the sense creating videos, doing the excursions through videos, etc., and creating exercises for the students so that they could do them alone. So what about balancing work and family? This was, as I said, this was a big challenge. And in my case, it was only possible because my 2 years old daughter could continue going to nursery. I think otherwise it would be very, very difficult because my family, I don't have family in Switzerland, and my parents-in-law, they live in another city in Switzerland, and they are a little bit a risk group. So we didn't have like this help. And here my husband played also a very important role. He helped a lot. We really divided the work at home. We did divide the responsibility as it should be. It doesn't mean that I have to be responsible, that this should be the normality. But I know that this is not the normality in our days still. He could also be flexible, working at home. And my older daughter, I was impressed. She understood the situation and she was really not demanding. She was really cooperating as much as she could. She understood that this was a difficult situation for us, and she helped us a lot. So I'm really grateful for that, that she could understand this. And I believe that the pandemic has changed also my perspective of many things, in the sense of how important it is to cooperate, to work in teams, and to be sincere also to the people around you, to tell them and not to be afraid to ask for help. For example, with my neighbor, we also helped us each other. We said we form a group and the kids can play together. We can exchange ourselves also. This was also great. And I think there are many people that are a little bit scared of asking for help. So this was for me also a good thing of the pandemics. And also to express your feelings, because during the pandemics, you turn to be in a hole. I think everybody had the feeling that we were in a black hole. And I think this was very important, to express your feelings and to see new things that could come. And what helped us a lot was also visiting nature. We tried, it was really on the weekends, we really went to nature and tried to connect once more, because I'm in the forest sector. So being the whole time in front of the computer, it was really difficult. So I needed to go a little bit out and to exchange with nature, everything. Yeah. Exactly. That is more or less what I wanted to say. And the one last thing is that maybe this pandemic has shown us also that the structures are still men-driven, and that we need to change them to make it more inclusive, so that all the aspects of our society are also integrated. And I think that's one big thing I have learned also from the pandemics. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jerylee. Thanks for sharing so honestly and openly about some of the challenges and also opportunities. And actually, the last thing you said, right, that it's still a male male-dominated society in many ways, and how things are set up, etc. That's actually a nice bridge to our next panelist, who is doing a lot of work on gender issues and gender balance in the forest sector, but also wider. So, Purabi, I would like to give the floor to you, please.
Hi, good afternoon from here. I'm Pierogi, and as Cecile has very nicely introduced me, I'm not going to talk now about introducing myself, but yes, I'm right now in India, and I have been working with indigenous communities, mainly in the tropical countries. And for me, when the pandemic started, it was in India, we started the lockdown just without announcing in advance. So there was a complete lockdown in March 24th, and all of a sudden everything was closed. So we didn't have time to kind of prepare of this pandemic lockdown, though there was not a single case in Mumbai by then of COVID, but we had a lockdown, complete lockdown, which meant that there was no flight between the cities. There were no shops that were open during the days except for 1 hour or two. And this was completely sudden thing. So it meant for all of us a lot of adjustment in the initial 3 months when it was a complete lockdown. It also meant that there was a lot of policing, which meant you can't really step out of the house unless it was a proper emergency with authorized letter that you can walk out, not even for walking in the evening. As you know, Mumbai, where I originally come from, where I'm born and brought up, I have been considering that as my base for all till now. It's a very crowded city. It's like 30 million people living in a very small space. It's unbelievably, people are congested in this concrete jungle. And I say it's concrete because you see more of concrete and less of green in the city. So that has been quite a lot of challenges in the initial phases. So just to give you a background that for the last 4 years, I have been filming, making films on issues related to forest, from mining, extractive industries to palm oil plantation, and to gender aspects, and about community forest management and how forest influences the livelihoods of the rural communities and indigenous people. So I have been filming all over India. So I have been traveling a lot, till the time the lockdown happened. And you take certain things for an advantage. You don't realize that, going to forest is a privilege. Going in a nature is a privilege. It's a luxury. I mean, for me, as working as an anthropologist and on the forestry issues, it was just meant like natural thing, like you go out and you go to the rural areas and you will be in the forest and you meet people. But this all changed when the pandemic happened. And I live alone. I'm a single person, and for me, living alone is not being lonely till then. But then suddenly, with a lockdown, you are locked down in a 90 square meter space without anyone to talk to, and your family is in different parts of this India. You can't communicate except via phone or Skype or WhatsApp. So it also opened up an opportunity because you have to keep sane. And I was like, okay, I have filmed so much and I have to keep myself as a single person. I have to keep myself active. And that's where I started thinking of writing a book based on my almost 2 decades of work in different parts of the world, basically pulling out all the experiences that I had, be it in Latin America or Southeast Asia, South Asia, and in East Africa. And those experiences, I decided to put it together and write a book. And luckily, so as there is a famous footballer in Dutch, Johan Cruyff, and his famous quote is about every disadvantage has an advantage. So I used that as a kind of a logic to start about working on a book, and the book got accepted for a publisher. So currently I'm working, but at the same time, just to quickly mention that the migrant communities that you see in the urban areas, they were from rural areas, but they were going back to the rural areas because in urban area they didn't have anything to do suddenly due to the lockdown. And I started filming them from my window. So I want to show you a quick, if we have time, it's a 90-second film. So I don't see sound.
No, I think what you might have to do, Purabi, is to stop sharing and then to share again. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And I'll try again to share, and then there should be a little thing that says sound activated, I think.
Share sound, yeah.
And then you can start up the video.
Just keep clicking. Okay. Can you see this, YouTube?
Not yet. So I think you probably have to share it. Might try to share it again. Maybe sometimes you have to open the film and then share it.
Sil is the flat stone with
I can hear the sound. Yeah.
So how does it work then?
Or share your full screen and then it's easier.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, now we can see it.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Surface. Bata is smooth but strong stone that uses friction of sil to grind raw food ingredients. Thousands of urban road construction migrant workers lost their daily wage due to COVID-19 lockdown. Overnight, women migrant workers in cities became most vulnerable. These 2 women took up the age-old art of making sil bata using the leftover stones meant for road construction. A single cell bata will fetch maximum $50. It is their only source of earning to buy food for their families in this lockdown. The 2 women continue to craft stone to make sil bata oblivious to the garbage van announcement. Announcement is about COVID-19 advising people to wear clean masks, regularly wash hands with soap, and to maintain social distance. India's COVID-19 phone call actually says we need physical, not social distance. Social distancing already exists in this world. Paradox is that these women are facing COVID-19 related vulnerabilities while producing silbata, which is the best clean green energy kitchen equipment. Women's inequity is not just about number counts of men versus women, but also between women of different color, class, or citizenship. The question is, will migrant women workers' life continue to grind like silbata? I couldn't hear, but I guess it was audible.
Yeah, it worked well.
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can't hear you all.
Can you hear us now, Purabi? Okay, we could hear you, but something went wrong with the sound. You know what I think we'll do, Purabi, because I think this was really excellent. I think we move to Sophie. I'll write you in the chat soon, and then we will hear from Sophie first, and then we get back to you in a bit. All right, Sophie, so the floor is yours.
Sorry, I can't hear you, but I'll just, okay. Can I continue with my last few slides?
Okay, sure, go ahead.
2 slides. Okay, so in December, I decided to move from Bombay to Goa, and right now I am in Goa. And I think as Cecil's work talks about 3 trees, 30 canopies, 30% of canopy and 300 meters to park, it really fits to this entire pandemic situation in India, because in urban forest is something that has been neglected for a long time. In Goa, it's the first time that I started going out after almost 10 months of being indoor. Though Goa continues to be in the lockdown, but going out in the nature is very easy. You just take a bicycle, you jump into a ferry, and you cross the island, and you are in very nice remote bird reserve or in a very wildlife nature-based environment. So it has been a very enriching. And of course, I can't say I cannot talk about well-being without talking about my cat, who has been very good company, and being alone, having a pet has been a very good thing in terms of how you manage. So yeah.
Thanks a lot, Purabi.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry you can't hear us, but this was excellent. We could hear you well. So yeah, let's. So we heard already the idea of company in some ways, right? So cat, that was really interesting. And I know, Sophie, one of the things you did as well, right, during the lockdown, when the lockdown started hitting, is actually you decided to be closer to your family, basically. So can you say a little bit more about your experience during the pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. And Purabi, I totally understand. I'm living with 2 cats right now, and they're wonderful company during the pandemic. So here, I'll just quickly share my screen, and we can start chatting about my experiences. So yeah, so I'm based in Canada. I'm a PhD student in urban forestry at the University of British Columbia, as Cecil said. And the lockdown, or it kind of hit pretty quickly in Canada. In a matter of days, it was decided that the university would close in person, and I had to decide whether I would stay in Vancouver on my own or go back east to Ontario to be closer with my family. And so I decided very last minute to just catch a plane home to Ontario and start part of my degree working remotely, which I think a lot of students decided to do, because we didn't know how long it would take. We didn't know when the university would reopen. And that brings me to one of the main challenges that I think a lot of forestry graduate students and undergraduate students and early career researchers dealt with, is this idea of uncertainty. It was really unclear what the timeline would look like in terms of, getting back to some sense of normalcy. And I still think that there's a little bit of uncertainty here, especially with the Delta variant, which seems to be surging across a lot of communities right now. And so that's quite challenging when it comes to trying to, get through your deliverables and the requirements of your program. And I think that it's something that we saw in a lot of undergraduate students that we were teaching, where even though, we got up to virtual learning and we had lots of great clear deliverables and outcomes for courses, I think a lot of students felt that uncertainty was weighing on them quite a lot. And that can be emotionally and mentally quite challenging. And I think that that's something that is more difficult to perhaps quantify or discuss because it can be a bit more intangible. But I think that the idea of not being entirely sure where you might be in even a few months' time can be really difficult to deal with from a mental perspective. That being said, despite those challenges, I think that there were also some really interesting opportunities that came with going online, namely the idea that I think a Zoom room might potentially level the playing field somewhat compared to a concrete room, so to speak. This is something that I experienced as an early career researcher, especially when it came to developing new partnerships and starting new projects. So during COVID, our research group at UBC actually started a project with a telecommunications company to start exploring more novel ways to incorporate digital technologies in urban forest management. And one of the benefits of doing this during a pandemic was actually that I was able, as kind of an early career researcher, a bit lower on the totem pole, to actually participate in some of the early development and design discussions, which likely would not have occurred if these were in person. And I think that we all kind of appreciate that meetings that happen in person often have a hierarchy when it comes to who is allowed to be in the room, because, there's a limited amount of chairs and seating and capacity. And I think that what's really interesting about bringing things online is that often there aren't really restrictions to who can be in a Zoom room. And sometimes it's not that difficult to just invite perhaps an undergrad or a graduate student along, even if it means just taking notes. And I think that that's quite interesting. And I hope that that continues as we move towards perhaps more hybrid approaches, or as we start kind of going back in person. And that being said, we do have to recognize that there is a digital divide and not everyone has, access to high-speed internet or even correct working conditions to be able to participate in these kinds of meetings. But I really was struck at the amount of people that I was able to talk to over Zoom that I probably would not have been allowed to talk to otherwise. And I think that that's a reality that we should definitely consider moving forward, especially when it comes to creating opportunities for early career researchers. So that being said, despite these challenges and also the opportunities that came about, I coped in various ways. I think that self-care is really important. I think finding ways to kind of, get those little boosts of serotonin here and there, especially since I was based in Ontario and we had one of the longest lockdowns actually in the world, which is kind of surprising. Whether that's just going for a walk or having some type of meditation routine at the end of the day is really important. And I hope to continue that even as we return to some level of normalcy, hopefully soon. I also tried to take advantage and do some skills building. So, build some skills that I might not have otherwise. I took advantage and actually got my drone license, which was really exciting. And that was fun because we could do that outside, safely, socially distanced. And that was kind of exciting because it fed into one of the projects that we started working on UBC campus. And I also tried to, and I know that this is tough because we had so many Zoom meetings going on, but I tried to create opportunities to have fun Zoom meetings. So whether that was catching up with colleagues over coffee or beer, and also just reaching out to folks who may just want to chat and kind of starting to build a virtual network, so to speak. Even though it kind of added a bit more Zoom time to my day, it was actually really nice to have meetings beyond just the typical project management research meetings. And I actually found that they really kind of helped me sometimes get through the day. Sometimes it was something to look forward to, even if it was just a coffee Zoom with friends. And I just want to end off here because as I was thinking about this webinar and what this meant for the future of forestry education and research, I started kind of categorizing this into these three maybe lessons or things to look forward to as we start to think about what it means to move forward from the pandemic and all of this. And so these are things that I'm really excited about. The first one being that I think that COVID has really emphasized a lot of pre-existing issues, and Jerylee and Purabi have really talked about this, but ideas of equity and how it seems that COVID has emphasized inequities, especially when it comes to gender and race and class. And I think that this will really shape future research agendas in forestry, which I think is really, really exciting. And I think that COVID has perhaps accelerated interest in some of these social issues, which I think is actually a positive thing. despite all the hardships that COVID has also brought. I also think that even though we will return to some level of normalcy at some point, education, research, and forest sciences, I think, has changed permanently. I think that's a reality. I think that there's more openness to the idea of virtual and remote learning. And I think that that brings out some really interesting opportunities for more novel and innovative approaches to forestry research and education, especially through the use of digital tech, which I think is really exciting at UBC. There are some great profs who've started using, 3D imagery to teach students remotely, and with hopefully better broadband connections, that could be a possibility for global teaching. And I think that there is a possibility for the democratization of forestry research and education as well, which is really exciting. And finally, this kind of reflects some of the challenges that I dealt with. It was a bit difficult as kind of a younger early career researcher without kids to justify having lower levels of productivity at times during the pandemic. It can be difficult to kind of tell yourself, like, I'm having a hard time too, even though I don't have kids and all these responsibilities. It was kind of hard to grapple with that. So I think that there's an opportunity here for rethinking what productivity and what success really looks like as an academic and as an early career researcher. I think that if we can start moving away from these really like quantifiable, tangible, like how many papers have you published and like, has your impact factor gone up in the last year? I think that there's an opportunity here to look at kind of more holistic performance indicators for success and what productivity in academia really looks like. So for example, how well are your students doing? Are you checking up on them? And what does good mental health look like in times of crisis during an academic career? So I think that's also a really exciting opportunity. And I'll end there for now, but I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards.
Thanks a lot, Sophie. There's some really great points you raised there, I think, in terms of, for example, putting a lot of pressure on oneself often, putting those standards very high, and then also having to be kind and adjusting to the situation, I think is really key point. Carol mentioned in the chat that she really recognizes your point about the Zoom meetings being maybe a more equal playing field. She says at Cornell that there is a custom that, at least at anthropology, that professors sit at the table and the students sit around them and towards the wall, I guess. So you create this kind of physical separation and physical power imbalance. So in that sense, of course, Zoom, we're all on the same gallery view in usual, unless you're pinned, of course, then at least you have a little bit of an advantage. But it's interesting that there is some democratization taking place, I think, in that sense. Great. So let's move on to Nick then to give his perspective on the pandemic and his work as a scientist looking at forests.
Hello to everyone. Yeah, I think can you see my slides? Yep. Okay, wonderful. So thank you very much, Cecil, for organizing this session, and thank you. And you already introduced me, and so I don't need to say much more. So I'll go straight to the point and to describing what happened, what I did, what I'm doing, and what are the things that that trigger some reflection that I will keep reflecting on. So about like last March, what happened in Belgium is that schools closed down. All of them except the school where my wife teaches, which moved online, and so this meant that I ended up with much more time taking care of my son, not full time, because I managed to arrange something with my wife and other people, but like much more time taking care of my son. And so all the computer work was much more problematic. My son was 3 years old, and so I didn't want him see me just on this side and while working on the computer. And at the same time, so my schedule changed, and at the same time also I'm an urbanist. And so the all what I study is how cities are good to bring together people for like social contact, professional contact, and so on. And all of a sudden, this was a dystopic, like cities were a dystopic landscape. We couldn't touch, like we couldn't see each other anymore. And so I, on the top of all the worries and that everybody shared, I also had like a more like philosophical concern about seeing everything collapsing in a way. So much less concentration to do any kind of work. At the same time, I was lucky because I had a contract and quite comfortable contract. I had to postpone a bit the defense of my PhD, but at the end of the month, the salary would come in regardless of the amount of hours I would spend on my computer. So this is the privilege I have to recognize. So among other things, what I started to do, and you see here on like the various pictures. Okay, so I spent time with my son, and then the first thing I started to do is start learning using a sewing machine I had at home, and I figured, okay, this is let's learn and we'll see. And so I started to sew masks for I live in a very in a building with a lot of older people, and so I was trying, okay, let's try to do some masks. And I tried and to make carnival customs for my son. That was also like an interesting thing. But then, you know, this last, I learned a lot. I didn't achieve very, very high peaks of performance, let's say, but it was a bit a way to distract. But then I figured, okay, I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher. What can I do really to make sense of what is happening around? I was not like, I was hearing this discourse about productivity, let's be productive and so on. No, for me was what can I do to help making sense of what is happening? And we have, as a researcher, I have the resources and the colleagues to try to contribute to make sense to it. And so through the Clearinghouse project, we launched a blog with collecting stories about green spaces and COVID-19 pandemics, and then and as well as a survey. 2 surveys actually, one really like a European service on people's attitude toward the green spaces during the pandemics, and then another one is about they closed the park here in Brussels. That was, so it was like a park crossed by a highway, and during the pandemic they closed it and they opened it again, and so on. And so I did some research to try to understand why and why not they should keep it open. So this was what I did as a scientist. But then as a third kind of activity, so in my exploration of Brussels green spaces via my work, so GIS and so on, I discovered that just a few hundred meters from my house there was a park, and then I went to see that park, and the park was closed and abandoned and locked down. And so I started to to talk to the commune and to the deputy mayor. Why don't you open it, and why don't you open it? And so the pandemic was the occasion to tell her, look, it's really time to open it. And then we, like, she finally approved and accepted me and a group of friends and neighbors and so on to enter the park, clean it up from garbage, cut through the jungle. This is a picture before the work, and then we managed to create some nice space. And so this was a good opportunity to really recreate social bonds at the level of the neighborhood, because this is a rather small park really for the neighborhood, and also to open up and increase the provision of green spaces in a summer, because by the time we were toward the summer, in the summer where a lot of people would stay at home, and so they would need some new things to see. Okay, so this is what I did more or less, and then in the next slide, I want to share the kind of things I learned, and I will keep reflecting on. I don't want to, I mean, these are not like revolutionary thoughts or completely innovative thoughts, but it's a bit what I felt. So first thing is scientist responsibilities and the 3 missions of academia. What I mean by that, so like the 3 missions of academia are research, education, and service to society. And I felt that during the last 18 months, I felt even more that scientists have privileges, a lot of privileges, and these privileges should be recognized, but also should be used to really do, like, to fulfill the missions of university, of academia. And so I think research is important, because at the end of the day, as much as I loved sewing with the sewing machine, we have the talent and the resource to do research. So we need to help making sense of what is happening, to really like put words and understand what is happening. Then the second is education, and this I have to share a bit of personal failure. What I consider a personal failure is that in the pictures before, you don't see any picture with students, and this is because in the last 18 months I kept following the students that are doing the thesis with me, the master thesis with me. But I have to say that I should have, or we should have, as a community of researchers, do more in terms of engaging students. And when Sophie speaks about the challenges she faced, okay, the students I'm talking about are probably a bit younger and like in a different situation, but still I think students face very important challenges, and I think we as researchers, as professors or like teachers, we have an important role even in the next phase, really to take care of them. The role of care is very important, and we need to and I really thought about, okay, it's really we need to find new ways to engage in this mission of education. And then survey to society is also important. I'm not saying that everybody should write blog and vulgarizing material, but I think it's important. I think we need to be open to really put ourselves at the service of society in many different ways, including, I think, putting our hands in the mud and try to change urban green spaces around ourselves. And then my conclusion has to do with the boundaries between home and work. And actually, what I came to realize is something is not a difficult balance, but what happened to me, at least, is that the two things merged completely. On one hand, I stopped going to the office. At the same time, I took my role of researcher really to really see my role as a father and as a citizen in my community. And so I actually saw a positive merge of the home, how to say, work and life balance. There's no work anymore. There's no life anymore. This is the optimist view, but then if you look into that more carefully, maybe it is problematic. What about long-term impact of that? But like what I want to share is a bit this new question I have is that, yeah, if you really do your work with passion and you open up to possibilities to integrate, to teach my son about forestry, I'm saying, or I say to take care of my community, when I go to talk to the elder woman, to the deputy mayor about green spaces, is this personal volunteering? Is this my work as a researcher? Is mixed, and so maybe the fact of having work and the home a bit more mixed together is not so negative.
Great, Nick. Thanks so much. That was a really interesting perspective, and it's nice to see also this kind of activist approach that you engaged with personally, kind of taking your science, taking your research, but also using it to connect to communities and connect to the pandemic. So I think it was really interesting. And Purabi, of course, you've also been doing quite a bit of that, right? Through your filming and kind of giving people voices that don't always have a voice. And you mentioned on the chat here the issue that it's nice to have, of course, this in principle democratic space of Zoom meetings and Teams meetings, etc. But then many people actually don't have access to that. For example, you say rural India, issues with electricity, internet access. So what can we do to make sure that also people in let's say non-urban areas or in areas with less good internet ICT facilities, how can we bring those voices in during a pandemic?
I guess this is the best opportunity the pandemic has given us to kind of build the equity. And I completely agree with what Carol has mentioned, that, when you break that through this virtual platform, it kind of lets you to create this balance in between people. I suppose the most important part is exactly where this urban communities came running, just like me. I came running from Mumbai. I relocated myself from Mumbai to Goa only because even my brother and nephew and sister-in-law, they all came here from Delhi. So we all now are in Goa. And it's the idea is that urban communities provide so much of it, and we need to recognize that. It's not just about payment or about economic aspect, but this entire aspect of how nature can benefit us emotionally, psychologically, and to be in connection with our environment is something that I suppose there is no direct answer to how we can create that. But as long as we urban city dwellers recognize the significance of the nature based in rural areas, and the rural communities who have been protecting it, is something that requires to be reflected upon and supported.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I think a really important point you raise. Jerylee, to come to you, you mentioned already, right, that you managed in a way to find a balance between pretty demanding family tasks and having a new job, all the other things you had to do, right? But what did you do for yourself to keep your sanity? You mentioned you went out to nature, but were there ways, for maybe even in your research or your work, that you feel you could find your own niche, your own little spot away from all the other obligations?
Yeah, that was a real challenge, and I'm still working on that. So as I think Sophie mentioned it, meditating, for example. So one thing I always do is before I sleep, I try to give my 5 minutes of meditation. And during the day, and it was really difficult to find. Of course, I enjoy the work I do, but it's still not relaxing in that sense, because you have obligations, you have deadlines, you have meetings. And for example, the first 2 weeks I had headaches as never before in my life, because I was the whole day with headphones, and I never work with headphones. And before, I never worked with headphones. I don't run with headphones. For me, it's something pretty new, also like this, with this a lot of sound in your head, you know. So I had to really, that was for me also a big challenge to really learn how to deal with that. And I'm still trying to find my personal balance. So I have balance between family and work, and I'm trying to find my personal balance. How can I take my time, because I tend to give the time for the family and for the work and forget myself. And that's, I know it's a huge mistake, but it's difficult if you want, because we are still in an early step of our career, and you want to succeed. And now is the time to do it, because in 5 years or 10 years, when the kids are grown up and I have more time, maybe my trend has gone already. So it's something in between, you know. And yeah, if you have how do you say, proposal suggestions and how I could manage that, it's very well welcome. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Yeah, there's some really good advice is also provided in the chat about grounding yourself and trying to find those moments. Sophie, of course, I've had a pleasure to work a bit closer with you. I know also that you put very high standards to yourself, right? And in that situation, as you already mentioned, you become self-critical. You feel maybe that you don't always deliver, right? And all of a sudden you're in this pandemic, everything is different, everything is up in the air. And you're still, at least initially, people were still held up maybe to similar expectations. And you already talked a little bit about it, but how did you manage to make that shift for yourself to say, well, actually, what I'm doing, I know what I do and I do what I can, right? But I have to accept also that sometimes the day will not be as productive as it usually would be, maybe.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll be honest, it's still something that I'm working on. Practice makes perfect, maybe, but I think actually Carol brought up a really interesting point in the chat. I think that there's something to be said for really grounding yourself and being kind of aware of what happens almost each day. And you can realize, I think, when you do that, that you are perhaps more productive than you realized. And so that's something that really helped me. I think at the end of every day, like I really take a few minutes and just, you know, slow my roll. And I'm like, okay, this is what I actually got done today. And even if I can't quantifiably see it, I just accept that I'm okay with that. And it's nice to kind of even just either, whether it's writing it down or just like thinking about it, meditating. And I think that helps ground yourself in not just the work that you do, but like your process. So how you've done that work, how you feel about it. So you kind of like shed what happened that day and you're ready for like the next one. And I think that that's really helped. And whether that's writing in a journal, as Carol suggested, meditation, yoga, or maybe it's even just like having, you know, some time to yourself to like read a chapter of a book. And I think that that helps process what you really go through, not just in terms of the work that you do, but also like how you went about that work and how you feel about that work. And I think that that is helpful for just being kind to yourself and just, you know, accepting that that is what you did and that's okay. Again, that's still something that I have to work on, but I think that it's really valuable.
Great, thanks so much. Very important points to be raised. Nick, there was a very first a quick question to you. So the park that you were involved in getting opened up again, so that was not in use then before the pandemic? Was it closed off? What was the reason?
It was closed. Well, yeah. It's a park that was, because of ownership issues, it was like the city stopped maintaining it some 25 years ago. And then when the city stopped maintaining it, it became, you know, a little jungle, but also it became used as for illegal garbage dumping and so on. And more recently, it was used by a population, which I don't mind personally, but the commune did, and it's the kind of people maybe from the construction work going on Sunday morning to have their beer there. And then, I mean, they also need parks for that. So it's, I'm not saying, but what happened is that the commune then at some point, they really fenced it completely. And then it had been a couple of years, I think, that was really fenced, and you couldn't, I mean, you could probably jump in, but like it was really not available for the random person. And so, because it was unsafe at some point, and so what we did was really to go in to make it safe again and usable again.
Right. Thanks a lot for that clarification. So you already mentioned, right, and I recognize this, that we, of course, we are among the lucky ones, or the privileged ones, I should say, people who have salaries and could still pretty much do what we wanted to do. So yeah, I'll give you the floor soon, probably as well. But what would you say, Nick, for you was the most challenging time during this whole pandemic? Because you said, well, you kind of reshifted and you refocused and you managed with but there must have been a moment where you maybe felt, oh, this is getting really tricky.
For me, I have, okay, first of all, but regarding the privilege, I admit that even within academia, this privilege is uneven. So with people like me who had like a contract with a couple of years room of maneuver and other people not. And so I also see that this privilege is not evenly distributed. And maybe the smile of Purabi meant, okay, look, it's not everybody. And then in terms of like the most challenging time, I think, well, 2 moments. The first moment was really at the beginning, because I'm Italian and I was observing what was happening in Italy, and it was catastrophic. And I was just saying, okay, in Belgium, they were taking it, no, that's Italy, it's never gonna arrive. And they were saying, no, look, in a couple of weeks, it's gonna be the same here. And this was really like very challenging, because I could really not make sense of what was happening. There was really like, how do you call it, this binge watching of news, what is happening here and so on. So this was really like hard, and I couldn't make sense of it. And the second difficult moment, I have to say, is now, because there is this feeling of, okay, maybe we're over, but then the long-term impact in terms of economic difficulties of shops being closed and so on, the long-term impact also of, I don't know, big companies, big monopolies growing and small companies losing, and also like in terms of like who has access to certain privileges and so I don't know, like I think that now I really like see we're not building collectively. I think I was always hoped in the last year, the world after will be better, and now I see, wait a second, it's not automatic. We'll need to fight very hard for that, and because maybe it will not be better actually.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I think I agree with you that this kind of positive energy that was kind of coming along as well, that hey, we have to do this together, we have to change things, that it starts to evaporate a little bit. So I think it's really important that we keep the momentum. Purabi, to come to you, your situation is of course slightly different than most of us others here, right? You're not permanently employed by university, you're not in a contract, you're basically doing freelance work, as I understand. So how somebody in your situation, how did you manage to still, I mean, basically make a living, right, during those circumstances?
I guess what it taught me, or this entire situation taught me, is you don't really need money, and you don't have to run behind anything of accomplishing of certain position, as long as you keep those two things aside. Just as Nick was mentioning of passion, and as Jerylee was mentioning about how it's important, like, you know, she's managing between her families with the children and husband, and Sophie was mentioning how she's struggling to have this mental aspect. I think we all are talking the same thing today here, and that is about not money, but about how this pandemic has taught us to be, as a forest scientist, to communicate in a way that we have never done that before. I suppose that's exactly, we need to keep that momentum going on, rather than again coming back to the normal mainstream of how many papers one has published and what is your salary, or, you know, how much proposals and how much grants have you gained. Because if we do that, we will land up in a more worse situation in the next pandemic, or whenever, I mean, hope not, but then if there are certain natural disasters, again, we might not be able to cope in better. I mean, this is the situation we have been given to change our thinking about our colleagues, of not thinking from, you know, whether the person has accomplished so many papers or so many grants, but rather what the person is like. And I suppose that's what is most important, and we are all talking the same thing.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, really very important perspective there as well, I think. And I see the people in the chat are reacting positively to that. So excellent. Sophie, one of the things I think that many people recognize is this kind of screen fatigue or Zoom fatigue, right? That we've all been on the screen all the time, and it is good in a way, but also I think for some people it's maybe a better platform than for others. You don't have the same kind of clues that you will get if you're in a room with people. Do you have any tips or tricks of how you've managed to navigate the landscape of Zoom?
That's such a great question. One really simple tip, and I don't know if everyone will agree with me on this, but when I'm in a room with a lot of people and I know that I won't be talking a lot, I actually turn off my video. And I don't do this to be like rude or to be doing something else, but it's because our brains are not used to getting feedback from our own face when we're talking to people, because who hangs out with a mirror in front of their face unless you're in a room with tons of mirrors around. But I think that our brains really struggles with that. We struggle with the feedback of our own face and our own body language when we're in a room with people. And so I find that fatigues me a lot. So in this context, if I'm a participant in a webinar, for example, or something like that, I tend to turn off my video, and that helps a lot. So where I can, I do that. I would highly recommend people try and do that. And if people think it's rude because of Zoom etiquette or whatever, you can preface that. And I think that there are studies out there that actually show that that feedback is not great. Beyond that, I think that what's really important is just trying to manage your Zoom meetings. I try to schedule, let's say, a max for, in a day, so max, and that's up to you. People have different capacities, and I think trying to be aware of your capacity is important. Maybe it's max 2 meetings a day, maybe it's max 5, and that's fine. But figuring out what that is, I think, is really important. But then again, when times are busy and you need to meet a lot, I also try and schedule them all, for example, in a couple of days, so that I have free days of the week where I don't have any meetings. So I think everyone's a bit different in that respect. And it's a question of figuring out your capacity, but I would highly recommend people try and turn off their video where they can. That has helped me so much. That took me way too long to realize that.
That's a great suggestion. And I also definitely recognize the thing of not planning your days full of Zoom meetings, right? Because it does eat your energy. Also, I think to have Zooms or have phone calls, right? Where you don't see each other. So you both should turn off your screen so you don't get that kind of immediate face-to-face feedback in a different way. So really good suggestions. I think the clock is ticking towards the end. I know, Jerylee, you have to go soon. So I'm going to pose the last question to you first, so you can go to your students whenever you need to do that. But what's the first thing you're going to do after the pandemic is really officially over and we're all free to do exactly what we want?
Oh, that's a big question. I don't know. I think I'm already doing what I want to do. So it's nothing more that I need. I don't need to travel big. I don't need to go shopping big. I don't need to, I don't know. I'm really happy with what I have. And I think my wish will be that people try to get less, because I have the feeling that after the pandemics, most people would like to travel a lot, to do many things. So I would like that they think of nature and think a little bit more not consumed driven. That will be my wish more than what I would like to do. Yeah.
Great suggestion.
So in a case I have to go, thank you very much. I enjoyed very much participating in the
Thanks
panel.
a lot, Jerylee. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and experience. Yeah. How about you, Purabi? What would be the first thing you would do when we are out of this pandemic? Oh, you're muted, Purabi.
I think it would be nice to work collaboratively and face-to-face. So I suppose I'm looking forward for that, and really excited to hope to have it soon.
Thank you. I recognize that feeling for sure. Yeah. How about you, Sophie?
Yeah, that's such a great question. There's so many things I want to do. I'll be honest, one of the things that I miss the most are face-to-face conferences. And I have, hopefully, we'll see how it goes. I have a plan to go to a conference in Sweden in November. So that may be the first kind of slow return to normalcy that I deal with. And I'm really looking forward to finally seeing people in person. It's been too long.
Yeah, and interesting. Carol made a really interesting reflection on that we almost have to kind of re-socialize. We have to get used to those face-to-face meetings as well. Yeah,
I'm going to be really awkward. I know it.
We all have to get used to it. We're not seeing the 2D, but we're seeing the 4D or the 3D at least. Right. How about you, Nick? What's the thing you are most looking forward to?
Yeah, for me, it's to work or exchange, because it's not only work, but also with the friends and colleagues in person. Not only talk, but really like take a piece of paper or a map and draw it and exchange and show. When I see my student, show in the papers I corrected, show like in red, look what I did here. I could draw arrows and so on. So this is something really I look for, or planning together a research, but really not talking only, but really like not touching each other. It's not what I'm saying, but it's like really like a exchange more than through the mouth, but through also like all the body and all the rest.
Yeah, the physicality of being in a room and around a piece of paper rather than on yet another Miro board session or so. I do recognize that. So that's great. Thanks so much to the four of you for so really generously and openly sharing your experiences and your personal stories, your challenges, but also the opportunities you've seen. And I think there's a lot of really interesting lessons to be learned. I'm really impressed by the things you've done, the activism, the changes you've made to your careers and the steps you've taken in the light of all these different challenges you've been facing in different ways. So thanks again, and thanks also everybody for joining us for this interesting webinar. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We will definitely post a recording as well, so you're very much welcome to send it to people that you feel will benefit from this. And I think basically everybody will, because we all have our personal stories, but it's really good to hear that other colleagues, other people have faced often very similar challenges. So thanks again, and I wish you all a nice summer for those of you who are actually in the time zone where you have summer and summer break coming up, and we'll see each other again at one of the next webinars. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.